The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
This week on the Workbench, John Jacobs from the Field Radio Podcast joins us to talk about making an amateur radio. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Workbench. I'm your host, George, KJ6VU.
And I'm Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
This episode of the Workbench is sponsored by Elecraft, the makers of high-performance transceivers like the K3S, KX3, and the super portable KX2. Check them out at elecraft.com. And by Autodesk, the makers of Eagle PCB design software, the software we use to design all of our Workbench build projects. Get your free copy of Eagle at autodesk.com/Eagle today.
Welcome to the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast, your bi-weekly deep dive on technical and making topics of interest to the radio amateur. If this is your first time with us, first of all, we want to welcome you. We are one of three shows that make up the Ham Radio 360 network. We publish on the Workbench every other Tuesday. On weeks opposite of ours, the original Ham Radio 360 podcast with Cale Nelson, K4CDN, hits that Tuesday. And then later in the week on Thursday, our newest show, the Field Radio Podcast, hits with our friend John Jacobs, W7DBO. And tonight, George, John is joining us.
Hey, John, welcome aboard.
Hello, I hacked your Skype account and I came in.
I think he passed the test.
Yeah, I think so.
I did. I'm in the club.
You are. So we're going to do a deep dive on your show a little bit later and get into some of the how there's a little bit of a crossover between the Workbench and Field Radio. Just to give a little preview, one of the things that you said in your very first episode that really resonated with me is that Field Radio is any amateur radio activity not in your shack. And I think that is so simple and clean and really does a good job summing up your general topic.
Yeah, so we take what are we doing with ham radio and how are we doing it in the field, and that may go the gamut from a SOTA activation where you're counting grams, and it might be where you are relocating your shack for field day. It's that wide of topic.
Well, awesome. All right, well, George, let's jump in. We have a lot of updates this week.
Yeah, we sure do. Boy, where to start? Maybe the first thing we should do is talk about our PowerFilm solar giveaway. We had a huge response to that. So quick recap, PowerFilm Solar is going to give away a 30-watt folding solar panel to one of our listeners. And we set up a special web page where you can go and register. And that page was up for over a month. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people that signed up for it. So thank you guys very much for doing that. And at this point, the signups are closed for that. And in the next episode, PowerFilm is going to announce the lucky winner.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And I signed up as well, but I'm not sure if I'm eligible.
I don't think you're eligible.
How many times did you sign up?
Well, how many IP addresses did I have?
Another good answer. Welcome to the Workbench.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I didn't bother to sign up, of course, but I'm very jealous. And PowerFilm's going to be on to do an interview, so I'm looking forward to that. They're letting us test drive one of their 60-watt solar panels, so that's going to be really fun. And sort of the punchline, of course, is, well, of course it works, but what I really want to look at is how big is it? How easy is it to deploy? How rugged is it? What's the actual power output on a typical day, sunny day, cloudy day? So in practical terms, how good is that solar panel? So I know, Jeremy, you've used them before, right?
Oh, yes. I'm fortunate in that I have two of their 120-watt foldable panels, and in fact have used them to power my field days now. Did it this year when my club, the Ohio Valley Experimenters Club, did field day. It was a 3 alpha. It was run off of batteries and solar. The whole thing was QRP, and it was awesome. and then used them back in 2014 with W4EDF and some other friends, KF5JNU, where we were basically kind of 2 alpha running the KX3 and then also the little U-Kits 20-watt radio.
No, very nice. Well, running QRP with 120 watts of solar panel times 2, I think you guys are probably pretty well healed.
The batteries, even overnight, the batteries, they didn't really go anywhere. The panels didn't have to work too hard. We had perfect weather for field day. It was sunny as can be, and everything was fantastic.
So the thing that I'm excited about with these is they're small and very flexible. And my big portable solar panel is 120 watts. And it's not that bad to lug around, but it's like 2 big frames and, it's kind of sharp edged and clunky and, it works fine, but, the power film just is so much more attractive. So John, I bet you've done a bunch of solar powered stuff in the past.
Yeah, my shins definitely have experienced that clunky aluminum that you speak of. I don't know, when you're unfolding those, they seem to attract your shins and your ankles. I don't know,
especially the aluminum that was never finished off.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that's a definite advantage. I've actually worked away from using like Goal Zero type just because the time it takes to assemble 4 panels into one and then get it up on a tripod, you're like, I could have been operating for 15 minutes now. So I find myself wanting a faster, more rapid setup.
Well, I was going to say the power film is definitely a field expedient option. I also own 4 of the original Goal Zero Boulder 30 panels that, as John mentioned, you have to lay them all together on a flat surface. There are these very awkward and fragile clips you have to use to assemble them together. The tripod's pretty decent, but it takes a little bit of effort getting it mounted up there. Generally speaking, I would normally put like a thin twist tie in the very center of it so you could always aim it to be perpendicular with the sun, i.e. where there was no shadow of that stalk in the middle. But you're constantly moving it around. You're constantly re-aiming it. You almost need 2 people to get it up and running. It's effective once it's up and running, but it's nowhere near as nice as arrive, undo 1 piece of Velcro, unfold 3 folds, lay something flat on the ground, and you're off and running.
Yeah, I've done events where it stayed in the back of the truck just because I was the only one there and I just didn't have the time to get the panel out.
So actually, this is a really good topic for your show at some point, John, sort of the philosophy of setup or something along those lines, because I think a lot of us start out with some idea of what our gear should be and we get it together and then we go use it. And the first time you use it, you walk away thinking that was either heavy or time consuming or fragile or blah, 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 something. And it's, perpetually refining your gear. But a lot of times we tend to throw in the kitchen sink and then you realize later on either it wasn't necessary or it was such a pain you'd never use it. So there's a lot of learning in the practice.
Yeah, and you're right, George. It is. I think we heard. I think it was on one of Kel's podcasts. The more time you spend setting up, the less time you are on the air. And if you're limited and you're going to a park for maybe an hour or 2, or you're at a family reunion and you want to get the antenna up, it's like it's going to take me more time to set this up than I'm going to be on the air. So why try? And that gets discouraging. So yeah, there is a philosophy of use where rapid deployment is key.
So the PowerFilm Solar signups are done. So we'll get to the announcement of that in a couple of weeks. Also on the list is the BitX 40 build. So we haven't forgot about that. We haven't talked about
it in a little while. Yeah.
But we're still following up with that. We're trying to get Asher Farhan on the show. He agreed to be on the show, and we're just trying to work out the logistics and want to get that done. Have you put yours together?
I still haven't gotten mine.
Well, so I'm one step ahead of you. I've got mine, but I haven't put it together. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the BitX 40, put it together means hook up like 7 wires. So it's not like a really big build project.
And solder them. You can't just plug them in.
Yeah, and solder them.
And create a case and build a case for it. And,
that's one of the fun parts.
Yeah.
John, did you get a BitX?
I did, and it's still sitting in the box waiting for me. I heard you were going to have a box design contest, so I've been noodling what my ultimate BitX box will be to win that competition because I hear the prize is going to be pretty good.
I have a sneaking suspicion there's a 3D printed case in your future.
Yes, very much so. Multicolored.
We'll talk more about 3D printing in amateur radio here a little later as well. Yeah, so John, you're a step ahead of me because at least yours is in your house. Mine is still in India, unspoken for. And admittedly, it's mostly just been extreme busyness. In fact, actually, George and you and I haven't actually spoken except for our failed attempt and a lot of cursing at technology when we tried to record the last episode, which was an abject failure on my part.
It was a good try. We got through it. Thanks to Mike.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mike. And then lastly, we've been getting a lot of traffic from our listeners asking, when are we going to have updates on all of our build projects? George, is there anything to share with folks tonight?
Yeah, a little bit. So two projects which got most of the interest were the antenna analyzer and the DC power monitor controller. So on the antenna analyzer, really nothing's changed there. We've been talking with Barrick about doing a redesign. He's really busy. And so hopefully before the end of the year, we could revisit that. So there's no schedule at this point, but what we'd like to do is replace the unobtainium diodes with something that's more common that requires a little bit more circuitry like an amplifier to use a conventional silicon diode. So that's on the back burner, but we definitely intend to do that. So I'm sure we'll revisit that by the end of the year. The DC power monitor, I've got several people who've asked what's going on with that. And we have a couple of clubs who wanted to use that as a group build project, which I think is a great idea. So we'd love to do that. The design is basically all done. And what's just got in the way is just too many things to do, frankly. But I went back and changed the circuit with the right transistors. So they're very low on resistance transistors. So they'll work fine at high current. And not happy with just doing that, I was giving some thought to the case. And so what I've decided to do is relay out the board with a different case in mind. And the case that we designed the board for, it's sort of an octagonal shape. It's a rectangle with the corners cut at a 45. So it's kind of 8-sided because it fits into a polycase plastic box. But you have to mill out the cutouts for the connectors, which is not that big a deal, but it's still something you have to do. So I was looking around for a case that would be easier for a builder to work on. So if you're not going to 3D print your own case and wanted a case off the shelf, what I found was a really nice, very inexpensive plastic case that is a DIN rail controller case. Now, so if you don't know what DIN rail is, it's an industry standard for logic controllers for industrial applications. And a DIN rail is this bent piece of metal that's about an inch wide and as long as you want it to be, and it screws to the wall, and the plastic box has a way to snap onto it. Not that you really need the DIN rail, but it happens to be a box like that. The cool thing about the box is it's already got a big slot cut out on the side so that the connectors will just pop out the side where there's already a big hole. So there's no milling required. So if you don't need the display, you just want the basic DC control functionality, it'll be fine. If you want the display, you'll have to cut out the top. And if there's enough interest, I'll have a batch of them made with the top milled out. So the LCD display, which will be optional, could pop through the top. So basically, I'm in PC board redesign for both the controller board and the LCD display. So there's really no new circuitry to design. It's just physical layout on the board layout tools. So I'm guessing that'll get done in the next month or so. And as soon as we have that finished and a prototype working, then we'll make a batch of boards. And like the last batch, it will be primarily a through-hole assembly, so you could do it yourself. But the LTC chip, which is a very small surface mount part, and the power transistors will be mounted by the assembly house for you, so you don't have to do that yourself. In fact, the power transistors we're going to are very difficult to mount because the solder pads are under the transistor package. So the power transistors we had in the current board have a tab and then two little leads coming out, gull wing leads. And you could solder those. It's really pretty easy. But the other package has the bumps on the bottom. So there's really no way you can solder it yourself. So it's not practical. We'll have those pre-mounted. So anyway, long story short, we're going to try to get a new antenna analyzer board maybe by the end of the year. And certainly we'll have the DC controller board probably in the next 2 or 3 months, I would say, Jeremy.
Okay, and along with that, we still have some stock left over of the dummy and smarty loads, but those are not going to be offered up for sale until we can bring the full line back online and have a new web experience where you're able to order those things. So please hold off for now, be patient, and hopefully if everything goes well, we'll have some more of this stuff at Dayton next year.
Yeah, and we also have some other build projects in the queue, so as if we don't have enough to do already, there's a couple of other ideas of some other projects that I think will be very useful too.
Outstanding. So, John, do you have any newsy type items or updates? I'm putting you on the spot.
No.
I recognize that.
Yeah. I have. We kind of talk about 3D printing, but I've started to upload all my designs. So people don't have to reinvent the wheel when they do a lot of stuff. And so that's kind of what we're going to start kind of coming out with the Field Radio podcast is I've been doing the YouTube tutorials, but I haven't really provided people with the tools to just, send that item to a local print shop and have them print it. So kind of working on noodling that. And that's kind of what the new direction I think we're going to be going with that.
Cool. All right. Well, George, you mentioned that there's a lot going on. So tell us what's on your workbench this week.
Oh, Jeremy, there's lots of stuff on there. So one of the things that I'm working on is potentially another build project, since we mentioned build projects a moment ago. For our club, we do an event, I'd like to say every year. We don't get around to it quite every year, but we have an annual event we call our Antenna Shootout. And the idea is to go to the park with a bunch of portable antennas and a radio and a computer and a big coax relay and do some field radio antenna measurements. So what we do is we set up a single transceiver. We've done this with JT65 in the past, where we'll cycle through 2 antennas and compare the propagation results to get some kind of real world comparison. So this year we're going to do 4 antennas at once. And I made a 2-port coax switch, automated coax switch. So it has an RF relay and a common and 2 outputs. But we need to do this for 4 antennas. So rather than cascading a bunch of these single pole single pole double throw switches, we're going to make a 4-port coaxial relay. So this board has got 4 coax connectors to go to 4 different antennas and a common coax connector, and it'll be microprocessor controlled, and you can send it a command from the PC to switch to which antenna you want. So we'll cycle through the antennas. So anyway, that relay board may turn out to be one of our new build projects later this year.
So I got a quick question.
Yeah.
So what's the shootout? Like what are you testing?
Yeah. So what we're doing is we line up 4 antennas. In this case, we're going to set them up for 20 meters, and the transceiver will be set up to run like 10 watts, and we'll transmit on antenna 1, then switch to antenna 2, then antenna 3, then antenna 4, with about a minute of transmission time on each of the antennas, and then go back and cycle through back to antenna 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll go through that cycle maybe 4 times. So what we're doing is we're transmitting, the first time we did this, we used JT65, and we were then using the Whisper Net. Frankly, I didn't write the software, so I don't really remember all the details, but we use, I guess, Whisper. Then you look at the Whisper reporting sites, and you find out where your station was heard. And the tricky part is you have to use a different call sign for each one of those time slots. So that way you can figure out which call sign mated with which antenna. So that way you can see kind of in a real world sense if, let's say we're in California, and if a station in, let's say, New York hears us with call sign KJ6VU at a certain signal level, and then they hear call sign KF7IJZ with a different signal level, well, that's the same transmitter at 2 different points in time, but you'll see a different signal level, and those are the 2 different antennas' performance. So it's kind of a way to A/B, or in this case, ABCD, multiple antennas. So, I mean, the other way to do it is you just listen and say, wow, this one sounds better than that one, but that's not terribly scientific.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you guys do receive test as well?
Well, it is receive test. Well, what we're transmitting, and we're relying on the other receivers, the remote receivers for the receiving end of the transmission test.
Right.
So basically, the way the day works is we get there, set up, and then for about an hour, we run through cycling through the antennas to get sort of a scientific measurement of which antennas work best, and then after about an hour of that, then it's kind of a free-for-all where anybody who wants to do anything with any antenna they brought is welcome to operate. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, that sounds cool.
Then we'll come back. So we'll do this in September, late September. So probably October sometime we'll publish the results so we could chat about it here on the podcast. So it'll be fun. We have right now the plan is for the 4 antennas to be a buddy pole, a Pactenna inverted V full-size antenna, a Pactenna random wire, and a Alex loop. So those are all pretty popular portable antennas. So we'll see between those 4 how they do.
Well, neat. What else? What else you got going on?
Let's see. The other thing, I just published a short video on the Facebook page with a remotely controlled dipole link. So when you make a link dipole, the idea is that, let's say you put up an inverted V, you cut it for 40 meters. If you cut those legs in half and put in a connector, now you have a link that allows you to use the same wire assembly for 20 or 40 meters. Now to change bands, you pull the antenna down, you make or break that connection, and you put the antenna back up. And I always thought that it'd be nice if there's a way to do that remotely. So I came up with a little circuit board that has a relay on it, a latching relay, and you put it in the middle of that dipole, and that relay makes or breaks the connection. So when the relay is engaged, you have a 40-meter inverted V, and when the relay is in the disconnected state, then it's a 20-meter inverted V. And I mentioned on the show a couple episodes ago this really cool new microcontroller called a microbit. And so I got some microbits and I designed the board so the microbit screws to it. And you put one of these little remote links in each of the legs in the middle. And then you make a third one that's identical to the other 2. And on the microbit circuit board, there's 2 buttons already mounted to the board. And if you press button A, it makes the connection on both relays. And if you press button B, it breaks the connection on both relays. And it does that by transmitting a message over the Bluetooth radio from the microbit that you hold in your hand to the 2 that are mounted in the antenna.
I see.
So, yeah.
Well, I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, have you tested this with a live 100 watts to see if RF will cause the microbit to go haywire?
No, is the short answer. So I just assembled them and wrote the code this weekend, this week. So I haven't had a chance. So this weekend I'm going to do exactly that. My guess is I doubt there's going to be any RF interference, but anything's possible. But I think that's not going to be a problem. The question is, how much power can the relay that I picked handle?
Okay,
so that's more of a question.
Second question about relays is, and when you were talking about the switcher, the antenna switcher, you made a comment about an RF relay. What's the difference between an RF relay and like a normal relay like we have on the DC power boards? So
a regular relay is just intended to switch power or some small signal. And the shape and the length of the mechanics inside the switch of the relay are not very critical as long as they meet the current and voltage specification for the relay. An RF relay is going to be more of a controlled impedance device, so that the path through the inside of the relay has to be designed so there's a constant impedance through the relay, and they're typically much better shielded. And it's really only important at very high frequencies. So frankly, at HF, you could use any kind of conventional DC power relay to switch RF for the most part at those frequencies. But when you get up into the hundreds of megahertz or higher, then you really have a problem with just signal relays. You really need more of an RF relay, assuming you want to keep the impedance constant, the insertion loss at a minimum, and make sure it works well. So the original coax relay, remote relay I mentioned for the antenna shootout, that uses an RF relay that we put on an analyzer, and the thing was flat as a pancake, well over 500 megahertz, where these links are only intended for HF. So any relay would work perfectly fine.
Well, that sounds cool.
Yeah, so the key thing for the relay selection is small, so it's not big and heavy, and also it has to be able to handle enough power, and that it's a latching relay, meaning it doesn't draw any current in either state. You just pulse it to go into the on position and pulse it to go in the off position. So the only thing that's actually sucking any juice off the batteries is just the processor sitting there waiting for a command.
Not too shabby.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Oh, geez. That's about it for projects. I picked up an AirSpy Mini USB, which I'm really excited to play with. So I plugged that thing in and ran SDR Sharp and was able to listen to all kinds of stuff. So that's cool. And I got some time to play some SOTA. Went up to Copernicus Peak, which is a high peak here in the Bay Area. It's a fire lookout. And worked a bunch of stations on 20 and 40 and 2 meters. So that was fun with my KX2 and the Pactena. So that was great. I'm really looking forward to doing more of that. So
I'm jealous. Yeah, I'm jealous. I still haven't done HF since field day.
Oh.
Thank you, HOA.
Hey, there's stealthy ways around that.
Yeah, there are. And one of these days. But not today. That's fine. So, John, tell us what's on your workbench. I know you just got back from the Eclipse.
Yeah, so we did the Eclipse, and so I did a 4-part series, the last 4 episodes on building my dream VHF UHF Go box. So I finally finished that and put that in the field for the solar eclipse, and I did a review on that and a ultra run support. And I tried getting ready because in my mind with the solar eclipse, part of it was we were going to be in this grid down internet sinkhole of everybody overwhelming the cell towers, and we wouldn't have much of any information. So at the last minute, I decided, why not try and set up an antenna and an SDR to monitor the NOAA satellites. There's 3 of them that pass by, and that way we can see if we're going to be cloudy day or sunny day, because we were going up a couple days early. So I didn't quite get that project done. So that's what I'm working on right now. I have a AirSpy Mini and a preamp. Should be here any day now. And then I built a double cross. I got the antenna built. It's a double cross antenna. So it's 4 dipoles kind of in a star formation. And so I'm just trying to tweak out a strange high SWR on that right now. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now that we'll kind of highlight later on.
Am I correct in this is like around, was it 132 or 137 megahertz?
It's at 137. There's 3 birds that are still active. And so the thought is if you have a double cross antenna with 2 dipoles, or actually 4 of them tilted at 30-degree angles, offsetting each other, and then the cable's supposed to be a little bit longer on 2 of them. It's supposed to create this upward zenith, I guess they say, with circularly polarized. It'll fit the antennas, so you don't have to chase the antenna with a Yagi, essentially.
Okay.
Or chase the bird.
And so you made the comment about using your AirSpy as the receiver. What's the software package you would run?
So the AirSpy is the receiver, and then a preamp. Then there's several programs out there, and we'll include them in the show links. But WXTO image is a decoder. So you basically it'll record the audio from the bird, and then it'll process it and create the images from it. And then I also use another project or another software program, Orbitron. And that's just a real-time update of the where the birds are and when they're passing over. But really, with this, it's a standalone system because you don't have to point. You point the antenna north, and it has a pattern that you don't have to aim it. So this is something you can leave out all the time, and as long as you have a computer running sniffing the audio, then you can just at the end of the day look at what images you downloaded.
So is this you mentioned the preamp? Is this the combination preamp filter that they have at airspy.us?
They have one for the NOAA satellites, which is the preamp for that frequency range, and also a filter for that. But what I've done is I've got the filter that just filters out the FM stations based on, I think it was the last episode you talked about that. And then I got the wideband preamp because I kind of want to use this for more than just that at the 137.
Yeah, I actually, the one that's 100 megahertz to 4 gigahertz, if that's the one you're talking about, I have one of those as well, and it's actually upstairs right now, giving me pretty good signal on ADS-B traffic.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted the wide range one, so I could do more with it. I remember way back when I got the RTL SDR dongle, and I've tried the cheaper ones, but I thought if I was doing this, I was going to get an AirSpy Mini. The laptop I use it on doesn't have that much power, so I don't think I would have gotten that much bang for my buck out of the higher AirSpy. But I think this will work, and essentially I want to someday get it hooked up to a Raspberry Pi where it'll just download the images and put it to a file server at the house.
So one thing that's really awesome about the AirSpys, and specifically if you're running Windows SDR Sharp, is it's actually not computationally heavy. In other words, like my little Atom Asus tablet that I've raved about will run it just fine. Where it started stuttering was on the full-size AirSpy, which gives you the option of 2.5 megasamples per second of bandwidth or 10. On 10, the USB bus in the thing actually couldn't keep up. And that was the problem for basically having dropped packets. So, with my AirSpy Mini, I have a little like $79 1 gig of RAM Windows tablet that I picked up long ago to use as like a little portable FL Digi terminal. And it has an even older Atom in it, and it runs the SDR Sharp software all day long. So, it's more that USB bandwidth that tends to be your biggest problem.
Yeah, and I have a very, very cheap, lightweight HP laptop that I actually got because I wanted to lower my power consumption in the field. And that'll be a whole other Field Radio episode podcast coming up, is taking what you set the standard on is what is a good field portable when you want all the features, but you don't want the power consumption.
Yeah, so instead of a gram weenie, that would make you a watt weenie.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, people that hike and really care about every gram they can shed off are generally known as gram weenies. Okay, anything else?
Or George.
Or, yeah, well, nobody's ever really accused me of being a hiker either, buddy.
I cut the labels out of the back of my shirt so I can save some weight.
That's hilarious. So, John, anything else?
Do you shorten your strings on your shoes, your shoelaces? Do you shorten those to save weight?
After I've laced them up, I snip off the ends.
Yes, there you go. Now you'll save some more weight.
That's right.
John, anything else on the workbench?
No, that's what I'm working on right now. I still have a half constructed tower at my house that I'm going to try before winter and get. I got all the lines up, but I'm getting bad results off of all the lines. So I'm hoping to get that done before winter sets in. Otherwise, it's really cold.
How tall is it?
It's a 40-foot.
And you got a nice big concrete block and all that?
Oh, yes. I overbuilt that block. It's actually right up against my house, so it's bracketed at the 20-foot mark, or a little bit below 20 feet. It's bracketed to the house. And then it's a very, very large rebar reinforced 4-foot deep concrete block that, if it goes, it's taking the side of my house with it.
Man, that's I'm pretty jealous you being able to have a tower, but that's good. That's good. In my mind, you had a giant antenna farm at your QTH, so you do have at least one tower.
Yes, I have one tower. It's got a Cushcraft in kind of a very used one, and that's what's giving me the bad results. It's a tri-bander, a 4-beam, I think. And then I got some slopers, some mesh network on it, some J-poles. I have a Comet CHA, was it 250B, also on a post. So I got a little bit of everything, some 2-meter stuff. And so, yeah, I would say my wife has declared it an antenna farm.
Very nice. Well, cool.
Okay, Jeremy. So what's on your workbench?
Man, well, the workbench is on my workbench. So my biggest here's what's happened since last I was not here. So I've been running a 6-year-old MacBook Pro like a champ for all podcast duties and all video editing duties. And in the last episode, I was having some issues with my audio interface and getting it to work with Skype, and tried several other computers, couldn't get it working right or reliably. And ultimately believe it's possible that audio interface is going south, if you will. Don't really know. All I know is on my Mac, when I had it plugged in, Skype would just immediately segfault and crash. So over the next couple of days, as I troubleshot that, the Mac started acting more and more erratic, and then started giving you the weird color boot up screens that Macs often will do when things are going sideways. And honestly, if I had to guess what's wrong, it's either the fact that it's a 6-year-old machine and it's some random electrical thing, which is actually probably unlikely. It's more likely that it is the SSD that I installed in it about 3 or 4 years ago. It's maybe it was 3 years. Yeah, 4. But it was a Samsung Evo 840 solid state drive, which was kind of one of their biggest pushes into the consumer grade solid state drive. And if I remember correctly, the 840s are known for failing prematurely because of a defect on the controller or something like that. I'd have to look it up. So chances are like the drive is just going wonky. So that machine was turned off because I can pull the drive out, mount it in Linux as read-only, and probably still be fine. Or at least I hope I can, because I just realized that would be, I think HFS is the file system. But so, fortunately, I don't keep any critical data on that machine. Everything else is on my network storage. So what I ended up doing is replacing the audio interface with a new unit from PreSonus called the Studio 6.8 USB, which is a 6-in, 8-out interface. And I am now recording from a brand new, to me, Windows 10 PC. It's made by HP. The model is a Slimline 270. I was looking for a small form factor PC. I liked this one because it's a modern Kaby Lake Core i3, which is more than enough power for what I do for podcasting. Had a 1 terabyte hard drive in it that's slow as molasses, but it's tiny comparative. It's about 3.7 inches. I have it laying on its side, 3.7 inches tall, and maybe about 10 by 11 inches deep and wide, or vice versa. But what I really liked about it was the motherboard is an HP reference design from the latest Intel H270 chipset, and it had an M2 SATA slot on it that was compatible with NVMe storage, which is lightning fast. Like, this thing boots in under 2 seconds. It is amazing once I put that drive in there. So I actually got to admit, I've been a diehard Mac user for a long time. I've been, dipping my toe in the Windows water a little bit more lately. And I have to say, actually, the setup that I'm using to record us tonight is going to save me steps in post-production, and save some steps for George in post-production, because I've been able to kind of condense the workflow, which is phenomenal. We're all a fan of saving time, aren't we? No?
Yes.
Yeah. That's.
I was going to point out. Notice that every story you hear of a Mac user going to Windows, it's not by preference. It's by the Mac finally breaking, and then when it comes to repurchase, then you go to Windows. That's how I went from Mac to Windows.
I mean, the thing is, my challenge is from. So the audio software that I use is universal. I can use it on Windows or Mac. The video software is I'm heavily invested in Apple's Final Cut Pro, and I've already paid for that. It won't run on non-Apple hardware unless I build a Hackintosh, which I have done in the past. So, I mean, part of the challenges with this is if I have to make the decision to start investing in something like Premiere, I've started looking at the options. I very much would like to replace the MacBook Pro, but to your point, you're talking $2,600 versus this machine, which it was a refurb machine that I got at Micro Center for $279. And that, I mean, to get this same level of specs in another machine, you were looking at a minimum of $400. So 90-day warranty, but the extended warranty was like $30 to extend it to a year. I mean, I'm really happy with the performance for the money. And if I wanted to, I can put up to 32 gigs of RAM in here. It has one of those like laptop style CD-ROMs, which I could actually replace that and stick in a little 2.5 laptop adapter, laptop hard drive adapter. It has a 3.5-inch drive bay I could replace with a solid state drive. Really, the only thing you can't do is replace the power supply, which is a custom form factor, bronze rated 180 watt supply. But for a small graphics card like a GeForce GT 1030, it's more than enough power, because this machine is available with a Radeon R7, which uses 50 watts TDP versus the GeForce, which is 30. But yeah, I could put an i7 in this if I wanted to and take it up to 32 gigs of RAM and actually it be fairly usable. And I really do want to give a plug for Micro Center, which I know not all of our listeners have access to. And unfortunately, some of these amazing deals you would not necessarily ever see on their web store, but they, between open box items and, factory refurbs, they often have a lot of really good deals on computing equipment. And they've treated me very well. And more importantly, they are my local source for maker stuff. So I want an Arduino, I go to Micro Center. I want a Raspberry Pi Bit and Bob, I go to Micro Center. They carry Adafruit stuff. They carry stuff from MCM Electronics. They carry the Microbit. I bought my Microbit there. So,
you got one?
Well, yeah, I told you that like 2 weeks or 4 weeks ago.
I forget.
It's still in the box.
Well, you have to make yourself a link for your antenna.
Actually, I was thinking about maybe using it to create that. I don't remember if I mentioned this on air or off, but creating the mute button. If the hardware option doesn't fancy me, I could create a little Arduino or Microbit powered MIDI mute button for my mixer.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's been the big thing. Couple of other things in my adventures with SDR. I took the opportunity to upgrade all of the cabling from the little diamond D220 Discone that I had. The thing that stinks about that antenna, so it's 100 megahertz to 1.6 gigahertz. It's a tiny little antenna, but it terminates to a PL259 connector. Like, it is designed specifically to clip onto one of Comet's or Diamond's SO239 like trunk lip mount things, right? So, as we all know, especially at higher frequencies, that's not the most efficient connector. But what I had been using to connect it to my radios was some inexpensive jumpers that I picked up at R&L Electronics here locally in Cincinnati, that were basically SMA or SMA to SO239 adapters, 6 feet long, but RG316 coax, which is atrocious for just in general. So I upgraded everything to very reasonably priced MPD digital cables, which MPD Digital was on a show of Ham Radio 360 in the past. All of their cables were LMR, at least when I was browsing on Amazon. They were all LMR cables. And so what I've done is I had a 1 foot that's LMR 240, meaning that it's 0.24 inches in diameter. It SO239 on one end, which I can put the antenna directly in, and that'll clamp or like hold it in place for the mount that I have constructed for it. And it gives me a female SMA on the other end, which allows me then plug in any jumper that I want, to go down to the AirSpy. What's interesting is the 240, while a little bit more performant, it's actually, have either of you guys ever worked with LMR 240?
I've used a lot of LMR cables. Yeah, mostly LMR 400.
I haven't.
I mean, so surprisingly, like it's about the size of like 8X, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a lot more rigid than 8X. Like the bend radius isn't as forgiving. I was surprised how heavy duty it was. They make a flexible version of it. But honestly, the flexible version of it, the performance, at least in the stuff I care about from the SDR, is not that far off from the LMR 195, which is 0.195 inches in diameter and a lot more flexible. Mm-hmm. What's cool is if you go to their website, which I will put a link in the show notes for, you can actually order custom cables of any length, any type of cable you want, and any connector on either end. They will even do custom printing on the heat shrink if you want that. So if you wanted to make cables that were heat shrunk with your call sign on them, so at field day that nobody in your club goes home with your cables, it's
hey, you know what?
You've done this. You have these.
Sort of. I had to make a whole mess of RG58 cables for portable operating, and so I had MPD make a bunch of cables for me, and they put the PAC-10 logo on the heat shrink.
Nice.
Yeah, it came out great.
Yeah. So
see, now those just become collector's items for people that are
exactly
with you, and they want a custom PAC-10 cable. That might not go that way.
I kind of want one. BNC to PL259, 50 feet.
Yeah, that'll be $100.
Hey, as long as it comes with those switches, I'll do it.
Can I just get the art, because it's only a $2 option to add custom printing to the heat shrink.
Yeah, just get the heat shrink.
Another thing that's kind of cool is, if I remember, I think if you order from their site, they also have like a flat $7 shipping fee. And so you can order as much custom cable as you want. The prices are fairly reasonable. I mean, the thing that's expensive are the connectors. It's not really the cable, at least for the gauge size cable that you're going to use for a portable setup. But what was cool, man, I just realized I had talked about going to the Dayton Maker Faire and then ended up not being able to make it because I had a family emergency. And that was really the impetus for me to order new cables, because I wanted a cable that was 10 feet long so I could get the antenna away from the monitor. But I think this setup is really cool because it gives me options to use lots of different cables based on what my needs are. The overall signal performance is a little bit better, and it's just a really high quality cable. And like I said, I bought them on Amazon because they had them pre-made and, shipped prime. And when I decided to do this was like 3 days before Maker Faire. So, yeah, but I've been really happy with them.
So by the way, when you look at those kind of cables at HF, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but at, let's say, 1.2 gigs, it does make a significant difference. If you compare the RG316 to the LMR 240, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's probably several dB less attenuation in the LMR. So the cable really does make a big difference when you start getting up into the UHF. 440, 900, 1.2, it makes a big difference.
It does. And, in the past, especially since the beginning of my portable career as an amateur was, portable QRP. I had an 817. I was going out into places to operate with a buddy pole, and then later, trying to use a dipole. People would criticize me that, you're spending too much time trying to optimize stuff. But the long and short of it is, there may not be enough or much of a difference, say, between like LMR 240 and 195 at the 1 gigahertz range, which is where, if you're doing ADSB, you'd be looking. But what it does do is, no, it's not going to do anything for your strong signals. It will improve your ability to get weak signals to some small amount. Now, I'm sure someone's going to criticize me for this, but I just generally live by the rule: get as much signal through your cable as you can for the money you have. Agree or disagree?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the RG316, for example, same as RG174, electrically identical. That stuff, 100 feet of that stuff at 7 megahertz is probably a few dB, 3 dB, 4 dB of loss. But let's say at 440, that stuff is probably like 15 dB of loss. I mean, it's hugely noticeable as you go up in frequency. So, things are much more forgiving in the HF band. So I use 316 all the time for portable because it's so small for backpacking. But for a fixed station, especially at VHF and UHF, then the bigger the better.
Absolutely.
That's why I usually use LMR 400. I used to use 9913, but that stuff's a real pain to work with. And the LMR 400 is about as good and much easier to work with. The only downside to the LMRs, by the way, sometimes if you really want to get picky, some people will say to avoid using them in high RF environments like repeater sites, because even though they're 100% shielded because of the foil wrap, that foil wrap can get noisy in a high RF environment, induced RF from other sources, and over time. So there's some people who think that's really not a good cable to use at a repeater site, but for a home station, it's great.
Well, cool. Good to know. Now, the last thing that is kind of, it's been bouncing at the corner of my workbench is with my newfound interest and love of my AirSpy and being able to remotely monitor. I talked on a previous episode about using the included software SpyServer, which is an application that is available for Windows or Linux that you can run. It basically takes the input from the AirSpy. It does all of the processing of the IQ data to output the FFT waterfall data as well as decoded audio over the network, which saves a lot of bandwidth versus piping all the raw IQ data, which is an option. But for instance, it goes from like 70 megabits per second for the full IQ data at 10 megahertz of bandwidth down to like 128K of bandwidth, or kilobits. It's really cool. Given how I have this setup running right now, though, what I would really like to do is I have an old, I don't know how old. It was my one and only like ever Black Friday computer purchase. It's probably a 4 or 5 year old Lenovo, really inexpensive, like 3rd generation Pentium, modern Pentium, not like the guys in the bunny suits. But Pentium processor. I put a solid state drive in and upgraded it to 8 gigs of RAM, and currently it's serving the duties of running SpyServer or ADSB server and then the virtual flight radar. But I would really like to move the responsibility of signals processing to a small computer. If I could, I would love to get that onto some type of a single board computer. And there are applications available from the airspy.com website for ADSB server and SpyServer. But the problem is with a Pi 3, your USB bandwidth is nil. I mean, it really, really, really is very low. I found a great article by somebody who, custom compiled the application, ran it on a Pi 3, but I'm pretty sure they're running the SpyServer at 2.5 megahertz of bandwidth instead of the full 10. So, as I'm looking around my bench, I have the Asus Tinkerboard there, which, by the way, overall, my long-term review is I'm very disappointed. I don't feel like that the software support and drivers ever showed up like they promised. I feel it prematurely killed an SD card. Don't know why. It may just be the distribution, but more to the point, they don't seem to have done anything to build a community around it the way that Raspberry Pi and some other of the popular single board computers have done.
Yeah, boy, that's just like lightning in a bottle. Coming up with a really supportive community around a platform, you just can't cause it to happen. It's organic. It just happens. And there's so many platforms out there, and most of them will never achieve that kind of popularity and support. So, hardware-wise, it sounds like a really, really good piece of hardware. But
yeah, it's phenomenal. But
the software is what kills it.
So today, I was actually introduced to something that is probably just as good and maybe a little bit more supported. It's certainly a lot cheaper for similar performance, and I think I'm going to give it a shot. So friend of the show and former guest, Nick the Exploding Lemur, KK6LHR. He was back on Ham Radio 360 talking about ADSB. He pinged me today to tell me about a new board coming out from the folks who did Pine 64. Have you guys heard of the Pine 64?
I know I heard of it, and I'm sure I looked it up a long time ago.
So
I haven't.
It was it's a single board computer based on similar components as a Raspberry Pi. I think it's the same form factor, has a GPIO header that's compatible with Pi stuff. Similar processor, more RAM was available. You could get them with 2 gigs, and they were also cheaper than the Pis. This company started off, I think, as like a Kickstarter or not GoFundMe, but the other one. They've launched several products since then. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. I actually have some cool stuff, but he pointed out that they have a new board coming out called the Rock 64, and it's based on a processor in the similar from Rockchip, who's the producer of the chip that's on the Tinkerboard. But the one on the Tinkerboard is a 1.8 gigahertz quad-core 32-bit processor, and the one coming out on the Rock 64 is a 1.5 gigahertz 64-bit processor. The cool thing about these boards, though, they have 2 features that are very desirable, possibly even for my cluster applications, but definitely for this. First of all, they have full USB 3 in the system on chip. So that should be plenty of bandwidth to handle an AirSpy running a spy server communicating with a full-size AirSpy, or maybe even multiples. So that's thing one. Thing two is gigabit Ethernet, which in the room where I have this all set up currently, I do have a live Ethernet port that goes downstairs to a gigabit switch for the rest of my house. So that's cool. It doesn't have to use SD cards to boot off of, which are the bane of my existence. It actually has an eMMC slot, and I could buy like a little 16 gig eMMC module to plug into it. It's still a flash memory, but it's more robust than SD cards. But it uses a similar communications protocol. So that makes it kind of attractive. But probably the real kicker here and the biggest difference is this thing is available with up to 4 gigs of DDR3 memory. The Pi 3 is DDR2, so it's much faster memory and literally 4 times as much. So they're available for pre-order right now. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes. I plan on picking one up. I'm going to have to probably buy their power supply because this thing needs a minimum of 3 amps to run, and almost every USB power supply I have is only capable of 2.4. But I think it'll be interesting. And what's cool is the article that I mentioned earlier about the guy who ran Spy Server on a Pi 3. I'll have a link to that. But he gives instructions on how to download and compile the Spy Server software on the machine. And since this CPU is supported by Linux mainline, I'm hoping all the make tools will work on it and be optimized for this family of ARM, which I forget. I think it's A53. So
yeah, it's a Cortex A53.
Yeah.
So do you know which Linux distro is ported to this?
No. They, I mean, by the fact that it's or that at least Nick was saying that it was mainline compatible, there's a very good chance that the Linaroo distribution, which it was the same distribution that ran on the Tinkerboard, is probably compatible. They say on their website that there is I think they said there's a Debian compatible, and then something called Yocto, which I'm not familiar with. Yocto Linux. It's fun to say though. Try it, Yocto.
Yeah, the fact that it runs Debian is kind of all you need to know, because that's one of the most popular distros. So.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a gotcha with that, right? And it's Raspbian is very popular because there's a group of people actively maintaining packages for Raspbian specifically, whereas I'm assuming that with these ARM implementations of Debian, you have no idea where people are in the porting process and what is actually stable and not as far as the package trees. I could be talking out my rear end right now, but I mean, honestly, what version of Linux it is, as long as it has stable support for the onboard USB and the networking, and that I can, like I said, get the make tools to run to compile this thing, I should be good. The other thing I didn't point out is that the 2 gigs of RAM with the 1.8 gigahertz and 32-bit processor of the Tinkerboard is $70. This Rock 64 with 4 gigs of RAM is only $45.
Wow. So
I can add eMMC in the power supply and with that board and be probably still under $70. So I'm really glad, Nick, you brought this to our attention. I'm totally going to pre-order one probably here in September, not necessarily before or after I order my BitX. But I really would love to get the front end to my AirSpies upstairs on one single box. And I believe that you can run multiple instances of Spy Server on the same machine connected to different interfaces.
For something like that, this looks like it'd be really good. I'm just looking over the web page. The reason I heard of Pine was I saw the Pine Book, which is basically a laptop shell that you could put one of their processor boards inside and make your own laptop.
Actually, I'm pretty sure the Pine boards actually come with the A64 already in it, because there's two versions, one for $99 and one for $89. And I think that's the difference between the 1 gig of RAM version and the 2 gig.
I thought, oh, good. That's even better than I thought, because I thought the Pine Book was just like the laptop case. I didn't know that included a processor in it. But anyway, this looks really cool. The one reason I asked about the Linux distro is when the BeagleBone first came out, they were promoting it with a version of Linux called Angstrom, and it was really just irritating because you'd go in and do a like a package manager install, and the common utility you wanted to install was not available in their package manager, which is really lame. So once they moved over officially to Debian, well, everything's available on Debian. So if this thing runs Debian, then odds are you have a really great platform here.
So I lied to you.
Oh yeah, what'd you say?
So this is kind of the cool thing about this laptop. It doesn't have a Pine board in it. It has the same CPU and general system design as a Pine board, but yes, it has a 1.2 gigahertz 64-bit quad-core Cortex A53 in it, 2 gigs of RAM, and then it comes with 16 gigs of eMMC on board that you could upgrade to 64 if you wanted. Has built-in wireless, 2 USB 2.0 ports, mini HDMI, all the stuff that you would want. And I think the price difference might actually be the screen size, because I think it's available as an 11.6-inch screen and a 14-inch. I have seen videos of this thing before, and the screen is actually surprisingly nice. It's not like super washed out like cheap LCDs tend to be.
Yeah, I'd love to see one of these things. This is really an interesting idea that you could actually kind of like hack together your own laptop on the cheap. So if you want to use Debian as your OS, this could be very cool. This might make a really nice field computer.
Yocto.
Where did that come from?
Thank you, John.
Sorry, I was buffering my Skype. My Skype was buffering.
Well, I think that's a good indicator that it's time to move on from our workbenches. And when we come back from the break, we are going to spend some time with John, learn more about the Field Radio podcast, and learn how John applies his making skills to being a portable amateur.
Elecraft is a premier provider of high-performance transceivers, pan adapters, power amplifiers, antenna tuners, and many great station accessories. Elecraft products are great for DXers, contesters, portable operators, and anyone who wants innovative features and great performance. If you want to operate portable, check out the amazing KX2. It's my top pick for SOTA adventures. I've been a customer from the beginning, starting with my K2 transceiver that I built almost 20 years ago. Since then, I've owned just about every Elecraft transceiver they've made, and I've been a very happy customer. You'll really enjoy their products. Check them out at elecraft.com.
We're back, and again, our guest this week is John Jacobs, host of the newly launched Field Radio podcast, a podcast all about getting out and away from your shack to play amateur radio. John, why don't you start by giving us a little bit of an overview of the show for those who may not have listened to it?
So what we're looking to do is there is some very much untapped knowledge base surrounding field radio. Now, when I talk about field radio, we talked about this before. It's everything outside of your shack, and so we wanted to not focus in on one area too much particular, but kind of stay broad and then take the advantage of looking at are you an ultra lightweight backpacker like a SOTA, or are you part of your MCOM, or do you do event support, or is your field experience just field day, or something like national parks on the air or special events? So it's a very big tent, and I kind of want to just look at and try and bring out subject matter experts where we can to share the knowledge. I think especially in MCOM and ARES, there's a lot of good things going on and a lot of good information, but it's just not being shared because so many things are compartmentalized.
Okay, and you at this point have done 4 episodes. Your most recent one was talking about your family excursion to go experience the eclipse and play a little bit of radio.
Yeah, so when I first started, I had a very defined first 10 episode outline where I was going to make them say the evergreens, and it was going to go through the getting your equipment, getting your battery, get your antennas, and then I suddenly, after one episode, got distracted. I think caught onto the space station.
We know how that goes.
Yeah, so I got a little distracted, and then I got back on path again, and did another one, and then I got distracted again with the solar eclipse. So I'm struggling internally because my OCD wants a very nice defined first 10 episodes to get in the field and what you need to know to get in the field. But at the same time, I want to stay relevant because I feel like if I posted a experience of our solar eclipse in January, I probably wouldn't get any listeners. So I want to keep things very relevant on the show.
All right. Well, very good. So tonight we are bringing you in, to share your show with the listeners, but also around the time that this was all kicking off, we quickly realized there's a lot of opportunities for crossover between the Workbench and Field Radio.
There is, because very few items you'll find are off the shelf for Field Radio. And if they are designed specifically for Field Radio, there's usually a price tag that comes with that design, because it's not we talk about amateur radio not having a mass market purchasing, and that's why our radios tend to be higher prices. But then you look specifically on something for the field, and it shrinks in consumers, which means the price naturally would go up. So you do need to be a maker to some sense if you're going to try and leave your shack and go in the field. Not 100%, but it's there.
Yeah, George, I mean, this is something that you can definitely resonate with, in addition to all the electronics we do. But I mean, I think one of the best examples ever is, you went out to field day and you came back with an urge to improve something.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, it happens to me like every field day. So this year it was trying to figure out how to make a more integrated station in a box of some sort. And so I've been on that rant for the last month or so, making my KX3 portable station. So I really enjoy that. I think a lot of the draw to ham radio for many of us is that it's a creative outlet. It's a way to do something hands-on towards a purpose. So I think that's very compelling, and you learn a lot in the process. So I think the whole portable operating thing to me is attractive because, like you said, John, you do get to build some of your own stuff. That's part of the challenge, and there's a lot of personal challenge in how do you even organize your gear, and how do you refine that setup, and then how do you build your operating skills and all the things that go with it. So I think for a lot of us, there's many things that attract us to that outdoor operating.
So, John, I mean, that's one of the things that, we talked about early on as far as making for amateur radio. We have focused a lot on electronics and microcontrollers and electronics for repeater sites. But what we covered in our talk at Dayton is that making doesn't just have to be playing around with electronics. There are all kinds of other things that could improve, in your case, portable operations. And you kind of mentioned one of those things earlier, that you've been working on your Grail VHF UHF Go box. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I got a Kenwood D710 quite a while ago, and that radio was my first radio that the radio control head was not natively attached to it. It's a completely separate head. And so I started trying to find a box to put it in. I put it in a briefcase. I put it in a rack. I put it in a Go box. I tried, soft-sided cases. And every time I go to do an event, I used to do about 10 support events a year. And I've brought that back down to a little bit more reality in my life. So I do 4. And every time I set up, I'm taking so much time setting up for this event. And then I'm sitting at a table. I kind of like what George was dealing with. You have 5 different wires and 4 different components. And setup and takedown, and it's just not clean. And so through building boxes for other people, I just kept on, it's like the nagging thing. You never get around to your project. So when I launched the Field Radio podcast, I thought, as part of my energy I could do is start from the beginning. And, pretty much the idea that you had, Jeremy, from your YouTube videos I found years ago was stop and identify what is it I want to do and how is it, what the components I need, and walk through the process and give somebody a 4-part episode that if they are going down this journey, what do they look for and how do they build it and what does it look like? And my idea of ideal is certainly not going to be the idea of other people. I think that's one thing. It's very unique to your person. So I settled on 2 boxes because if you're going to have one, why not have 2? And so I did a radio box where the radio and the battery and the components and SWR meter, signal link, everything sits in a box. And I'm like, that doesn't need to be on the table. That takes up space. And so I put it in a box that sits on a crate or on the ground. And then I took a second box, a smaller one, and said, okay, let's put the radio control head in. Let's put the speakers. Let's make a snake, where there's 4 or 5 cables coming up to it, very organized, neat, professional, because that's one thing I want to espouse when I'm at events. And what else can I add to this to make it workable? USB lights, a clock. And so I think after these 2 events, I really feel satisfied with the build, and I'm really excited to actually break out this box and use it. And it works great at home too, because I'm very much a believer that you should be using the radio you use in the field in the home. That way you don't get out in the field and stare at the radio and not really remember where things are in the menu. So this is also something that works for the home.
Yeah, tell us just at a high level, you talked about building 2 boxes. I know George has tried different toolboxes and rack cases. I have the 65-pound behemoth downstairs. It's a 6U wheeled rack case that has my 710 in it with an ICOM 7100 and an ID 880 because, hey, there was room and you can't have a Go box with empty space in it. And it's so heavy that it really is it's a not go far box. So, kind of talk a little bit about the construction. And then I also, if I remember correctly, you did a series of videos on this on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, so I started out with, it's a 4-part series. Part 1 is the design and the purpose of the box. And then part 2 was, I believe, laying out and schematics. Then part 3 was building and manufacturing and fabricating. And then part 4 was the wrap up, kind of walking through each piece and what it does. So I have 2. One is an MTM case. It's people call them ammo boxes or a field box. I prefer the plastic ones. And this is an extra deep box, so I could put everything in it. Then I 3D print the base plates that go on it. And so everything obviously now fits really nice because with the 3D printer, you can get very exact with where you put components. And then it goes up to a plano case, which is an ammo can plano case. And that's the box that actually sits on the table that has the radio control head, an MFJ selector switch, speakers, and everything is connected by, 2 cables. One is the snake and one is the control cable that goes from the radio to the control head. And that, for me, I have an open bed pickup truck, and I try and keep everything in the back of the truck, but a lot of times when we bring runners down that have did not finish from our location, I end up putting my gear in the back of the truck, and then I came back with a rack, and I had dust inside the rack even though it was closed. So that's why those ammo cans work so good for me is not necessarily waterproof, but dustproof.
Yeah, they have like a little rubber seal on them, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and once I drill in the side of them, I kind of break whatever waterproofing there is, but it gives a reasonable sense of protection to the case. I can feel comfortable, putting it in the back of a bed for transport. And then the plastic I really like because it's easier to work with. And if you have a wire come loose inside, your box isn't conductive.
It's as far as the MTM cases, I'm assuming that's one of the Spud cases.
Yeah, it's one of the Spud cases, and there's a deep one that it has a tray that sets in it. And so for this one, I didn't need the deep one, but I did the deep one so I could push everything down into the box, and then I could still use the pull-out tray, and then they have another they call it the hidden compartment that's in the lid. So it's got some capability to hold the accessory cables, which was another important thing I found with all my racks and cases. I would have my rack, and then I would have like this bag that I would always be afraid of leaving home that had the microphone in it or something like that.
Yeah,
so,
something critical.
Yeah, something critical. So it's all together now.
So when you're assembling these boxes, are you just mounting things like by drilling holes through the plastic, or did you build like a custom frame? Because my introduction, oddly enough, to the Spud case was actually from Cale long before the podcast was an idea. The forum that he and I were both a member of, he posted pictures of his little Radio Go box, and it was some plywood and at four corners some all thread, and he had a couple of shelves, and he had his the Kenwood it was the TS50 on there with a 2-meter radio, and it all fit in this little Spud case on its side, and you could pick it up and take it away. And like I said, that was long before I would meet Cale and we would start doing the podcast together. But do you have any type of frame like that?
No, so everything is bolted down to the box itself. That's why I say I do drill into the side of the box, which, some would say would compromise. Yes, if it gets dropped in a lake, it's going to sink a little bit faster, type thing. But so everything is mounted inside the box, whether it's I've 3D printed slide rails or just taking components and like the battery or bracing the battery to the side of the box. I try not to drill anything less than 1 or 2 inches from the base and the bottom, because I found that my back of my pickup truck does retain water when it rains. And so if it's going to have an issue, water is going to be coming from the bottom, or if there's dew or something like that. So I try to not pierce the bottom of the box to keep some sense of waterproof, but everything is bolted in, and then I 3D print the panels and then I use 3D printed brackets also. And so everything is kind of adhered to the box. It doesn't slide out, say, in a secondary box.
Well, very cool. Yeah, we're going to deep dive a little bit more on the 3D printing aspect here in a little bit, because one of the things when you and I met in person for the first time at Dayton is you sent me home with a baggie full of 3D printed ham radio goodies that you had designed and made yourself, including a little Anderson Power Pole polarity checker.
Yeah, so that's some of those designs I just found on going to Thingiverse, and other people have put up those designs. But yeah, if you want a power pole cap, or even those little tiny pins that go in to keep the power pole connectors together. So I just I've used the 3D printer as I have a problem, what's my solution? And usually it comes to the 3D printer. But yeah, there's a lot of parts out there that I've created or other people have created that are, single power pole panel mounts, stuff like that. But that little battery tester, I found the plans for it. It was a club that did it. And it's simply just a dual polarity LED with a resistor on one side. And so if it gets positive on one and negative on the other, it gives you a green light. And then if it's reversed, it gives you a red light. And so it's a little bit when your buddy says, hey, go ahead and plug your radio into my power pole here, my connector, you can pull that out and first of all, verify you do have power. And second of all, verify that you have correct polarity.
Very cool. Now, John, before you started the podcast, like the way we actually first met is that you had started a company called Comms2Go.
Yeah. So after being asked many times to build boxes for local amateur radio operators in the area, I decided to, actually it was my wife saying, you need to monetize this hobby of yours, because she sees me building boxes after boxes. And so we thought we might as well give this company a go. We gave it a run. We went to Hamcation and Dayton and had booths. And so because it's not my primary employment nor my secondary employment, I haven't really pushed the company that much to be successful, I guess, in really getting a lot of customers. And I don't think I really want a lot of customers either. I like the idea that I get Ham Radio 360 listeners that call me and say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, and I want a very specific box that fits a very specific need. And so I really feel like I'm not in the bulk manufacturing company. I'm more of a solution to a problem, a boutique. Yeah. And I don't list prices anymore because I want to talk to them on the phone and interview them and find out exactly what do you want in the box, what do you need, what do you like, what you don't like. And then I sit down and kind of draft something up and come back to them and say, well, hey, here's this kind of solution, or I'll research something for them ahead of time. So it's a very, very custom type company now, which is where I want it to be.
Well, that's really nice. George, maybe you should have called John to talk about your KX3 problem.
I'm sure. The funny thing about the KX3 project is, of all of the Go kits that I've seen, or Go boxes, what I wound up building was like nothing else. And I think, your point about getting some experience with the stuff was necessary, because I would not have dreamed up this thing I wound up building had I not sort of played around with a bunch of other things that I wasn't too happy with. So I really appreciate, John, when you said you finally kind of cracked the code on the assembly of stuff and the physical layout for your Go kit that really works for you.
Yeah, and thank you for correcting me on Vago.
No,
I call it Wago.
Yeah, no problem on that. Yeah, those are great. I think that I'm really happy you mentioned that, because I had actually used those things 4 or 5 years ago, the old ones, the old like rounder ones. And when you mentioned that, I went to look them up again, and I hadn't realized that they came out with that new version. I love the new version. It's great.
Well, the old version was the fingernail breakers.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
those are
in case people have no idea what you're talking about, what are these Vagos?
So there's a connector company from Germany that's very famous called Vago, WAGO in the German pronunciation, as we figured out. And they make this thing that's called a lever nut, I guess. It's a little plastic housing, and it's got 2, 3, or 5 holes on the front, and above each hole there's a little plastic lever. And you flip the lever up, you can then take a piece of wire that's stripped, stick it into the hole, and snap the lever down, and that will make a contact. And all of the contacts in the housing are bridged. So it's essentially like a wire nut. If you're doing AC wiring at home and you'll twist the wires together, then you screw a wire nut cap over those twisted wires. It's for that same purpose. But these things are really nice. They're small. They'll handle anything from about a 12 to 22 gauge wire, and they'll handle several tens of amps. In fact, the YouTube videos, there's some really fun videos to watch of guys who've done destructive testing with these things, and they run them up to like 90 or 100 amps before they start to fail. So the beauty of these things is they're compact, and they're like the perfect thing to splice DC or AC wiring together, like power wiring. So when John mentioned this on his show, I looked them up again, found the new ones, bought a box of them, and it was perfect timing, because when I built my new KX3 Go box, I used that to connect all the DC wiring together, and it just is great. By the way, one of the real nice things about that too is if you want to change the wiring, you could just go in and unsnap the connections and rewire it any way you want. Add new devices or make changes. It's much better than splicing wires and soldering and taping it up.
Yeah, it's definitely field configurable when you have an electrical issue in your box and you're reaching in. The other thing I like is it's a positive contact on that cable. It is holding that down, very locked in. And also you can mix gauges. You can mix gauges, or you could do stranded or solid wire. Whereas, normally with a wire nut, you have stranded wire and solid wire. Sometimes things, the stranded finds its way to slip out.
Yeah, really good point. And they're very small. They're surprisingly small. It's not much bigger than the wire.
So I'll take 2 of them, and in a 1 to 5, I'll bring in the power from the switch, and have one for positive and one for negative. And then when I have it done, I just wrap a little bit of electrical tape around both of them. And it just creates a little positive negative bridge.
So there's a link to those things on the last Workbench show. So if you're interested in looking up more info on them, there's some nice videos and also a link to buy them on Amazon.
Yeah, we'll make sure it's in this one too.
Yeah, so not just PowerPole the World, but Vago the World.
Yes, it's an accessory to the PowerPole, of course.
It's the DC version.
Yes.
So John, when you are doing this type of field support work, obviously you have your radio box with the appropriate accessories. We talked about that. You're also going to obviously have some type of a portable antenna and have some type of power solution. Have you had to apply any making type skills to your portable antenna or portable power setups?
Yeah. So of course, like I said, when I have an issue, my first thought is can I print it? And I found out, yes, I can. So securing batteries in boxes, and I have, through my association with the Comms2Go and Biano Power, I've pretty much become an evangelist for them. I really like their batteries, and like with anything, an SLA or a LiFePO 4 battery, they're really hard to secure inside boxes because you're obviously not going to want to drill in the side of it. But you can 3D print, if the battery sits in the center of the box, I'll 3D print 4 brackets that sit around it and basically make the battery hover in the center of the box so it's balanced. Or I'll 3D print some type of bracket and then use web strapping additionally. So I found that, and then I was also found using painter poles. This was my last project I just did. I have a diamond antenna that's meant to sit down in a tube. And when I put that on a painter pole, the painter pole kind of always leans to the side because it offsets the antenna to the side of the painter pole. So I just went to the 3D printer and I said, well, I have a painter pole and I have a diamond antenna. So I made an adapter that screws on the top of the painter pole, and then the diamond antenna slips down into the top of the 3D printed part. And then I made a hole in the side for the antenna to come out. And I found that holds the antenna, the weight distribution stays right on top of the painter pole. So I've kind of, every time I come up with an issue, like I said, I kind of find a way to, with field radio and making, you first look to repurpose. What out there can I use? Can this bag work? This bag that wasn't meant for this. I find myself going down the kitchenwares aisle at Walmart looking for things that might fit, or school supplies or something like that. So if you can't repurpose something, then you need to invent it. And that's kind of where my 3D printing came from. Was I couldn't really find a solution, so let's just go ahead and make our own.
Nice. Now, what about building out a power box? Because that's something else we talked about in our talk at Dayton. It's not just, again, playing with electronics or even fabricating stuff. Sometimes it's just taking a bunch of other people's components and bringing them together in a system.
Yeah. So and this was a very thing that I kind of adapted from you, Jeremy, was in the beginning, separating concerns and putting your power separate from your radio. I find that is very true, but there's always a however. However, I do like also the thought of having just a smaller battery in with the radio. That's something that gets you up on the air faster, and then you can address having larger power. So I always like to put, like a 12 amp hour battery in the radio box, and that's what I did. And that's just enough to get started in an event, and not certainly enough to run all the time. So then I started looking at, let's separate concerns. Like the solar charge controller is in its own box. The battery is in another box. And so I kind of started down that road when I was developing boxes for other people, was getting a very small box, a little 12 amp hour box type thing. And then I went up to a 40 amp hour box with AGM batteries, and that's called the Beast. that holds down the Easy Up from the wind. It's 220 amp hours put together with some with a 3D printed plating. So the last one I did was actually the Biano Power 40 amp hour. I built one for a customer, and I liked it so much I went back and thought, I'm going to build a demo on this. And so with that one, you do take a whole bunch of other components. I mean, everybody takes the panel mounts, the USB and the voltmeters, kind of like what you did, George. So you get those components. You get like a Drock power meter or a Tenergy power meter. You throw that in there, and West Mountain rig runner. Put that in, and then get some other components. So, but like I said, you find yourself 3D printing down low to balance the battery and to lock it in. Then you find yourself printing plates up top to kind of hold all these components in. So I do really like having a separate battery box, but at the same time, like I said, I do like having the internal battery for startup.
So, cool. Out of curiosity, what do you use for a charge controller for your solar charging?
So I have Biono Power has one that I have put in its own box with a 10Energy power meter, and then also have, and of course the name escaped us, the one we were up camping too. What's the little tiny one that
is it Genasun?
Genasun, yes.
Yeah, they're
so I have a Genasun. Yeah, so either Genasun or the Biono Power one. Those are the two solar charge controllers I have, and the Biono Power one I just put inside of a very small, thin ammo box because that way I can use that across multiple boxes, multiple battery boxes or multiple radio boxes. I have a Genasun that's built into an ammo can box, and I haven't used it in a long time because it's kind of married to that battery.
Just one fast fact, because George, if I remember correctly, you also picked up a Genasun following my reference design for a power module that John on mic heckled me for never finishing that build video.
It still hasn't been finished.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. I still have all the I'm staring at the box right now. It's sitting here to my left. So you have that Genasun charge controller as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. When I made the Jeremy Clone orange box, I just followed your recommendation to the letter and put in the Genasun in that. And I also put a Genasun in another box with an SLA battery for my 7100. So I'm pretty happy with them. I think they work great.
So I think it's important to mention across. Oh, sorry, just to mention, for everybody doing this, the Genasun or your solar charge controller has to match your battery chemistry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. So, the part of the reason that I like Genasun so much is because at the time they were the only solar charge controller that I could find that was maximum power point tracking and didn't cost like $300. You can get started with a 5 amp charging module for under $100, available both in sealed lead acid, and then it comes in several voltage ranges based on what kind of lithium battery you have. So, as far as the number of cells you would have in series, and then adjusting a little bit for traditional lithium chemistry or lithium iron phosphate. Now, what's interesting, and this kind of ties into a product George talked about before, which is the new Buddy Pole. I think they call it the Power Mini. Mm-hmm. And it's basically like a power monitor with a couple of power pole connectors on it. It's got a charge controller built into it, but it's not maximum power point tracking. But the thing is that there was question about what is the maximum voltage. And as we've talked before, when charging a lithium battery, it's basically a constant current cycle. And then as the current continues to go, the voltage of the battery will increase. And when you get done, you switch over to constant voltage, and it's a very tiny little trickle. The Biono batteries, which, as you guys know, I am also a huge fan of, and have appreciated Kevin being on our show a couple of times. They are rated for their quote unquote float voltage at 14.6, whereas most of these systems are at about 14.4. So I actually reached out to Genasun about changing the voltage point. Now, two things also about Genasun. Number one, the guy who designed these is a ham from up in the New England area. And number two, because he's a ham, these things are RF quiet. And that's really, in addition to being small and a easy to work with package, they don't put out a lot of RF hash, which every other charge controller I've ever used, and at least in my experience, has always had some level of RFI.
Well, and that's why I say he wants to go to heaven. Because any EE that makes RF hash is not going to heaven. So obviously he has desires that way.
Yeah. So what's cool though is when you order one, especially for lithium, if you wanted to get one specifically for the Biono batteries, you can order a custom voltage point, the custom voltage cutoff point. It's a little bit more expensive. I think like instead of $80, they're like $120. And then also I had inquired, because at the end of the day, if you pop the thing open, there's a little Atmel microprocessor inside. And so I was curious if there was any software available that would let you, the end user, change these points, and there wasn't. But if you have one and you did want them changed, at least there is an option that you can send it into them. And I think it was $50, and they would change the charging points for you or the algorithm. So again, a little expensive, but it's nice that the option is there.
Yeah, my father actually got a lithium ion to begin with, and when he switched to LiFePO 4, he sent it back to them, and they reprogrammed it for LiFePO 4.
Oh, that's pretty nice.
So for a fee.
Yeah, I mean, and it's pretty
better than buying a new one.
Oh yeah. No, but they're good, and like I said, I really like them in any box that I build. I have both 5 amp and 10 amp versions of both the lithium and the sealed lead acid. George, how is your battery box?
Which one? Do you mean the Jeremy Memorial
the
Orange battery box?
Yeah, the KF7IJZ Memorial box.
Oh, awesome! We used it at Field Day. It's got that prismatic LiFePO battery in it, and the whole bit, just like you did in your video. It worked just fine. The one thing I'll say about that battery is the thing really retains its terminal voltage for a very long time. So we've got that big voltmeter on the side of the case, and it sits there at about 13.5 volts or so. And every time I glance over at it, it could be sitting there for months and months, and it hasn't budged a tenth of a volt. So those things are actually quite good storage batteries.
Yeah. So those batteries. And John, I don't know if you've seen my video, you're familiar with them, but Elite Power Solutions, I believe, is a company out of Arizona. These are Chinese cells that I think are GBP or something like that. They are a custom version of lithium iron phosphate. They come in large capacities and are fairly affordable. Oddly enough, it's the shipping charge that really kills you because it's now harder to ship just lithium batteries. But when you get these things, because these prismatic cells are basically foil packs that have been bound together in a plastic cartridge, and that plastic cartridge gets put into a steel press, and there are, in our case, 4 of these cartridges that get put inside of a steel press, wrapped in steel plates, and then have like grade 8 threaded bolts like holding the whole thing together, because they're designed for electric vehicles where you're going to have incredibly rapid incredibly rapid charge and discharge, and lithium packs tend to physically expand when under such duress. So they are literally under a lot of pressure. The kind of stuff that amateurs are going to do with them, you're not really putting them under any appreciable load, because I have George and I have the 40 amp version or amp hour version. So 1C, which is very comfortable for that, would be a 40 amp discharge, which is not a thing at all. But they're good batteries as well.
So if you were going to do that battery box, Jeremy, again, would you use that same battery, or would you go with something like the Bioenno batteries?
So it's kind of a tough choice because I think they're slightly, different horses for courses. With the Bioennos, you get the built-in protection, and you get the built-in balancing, and you get in a lot of that stuff for free. Whereas on the big prismatic cells, those are add-ons. Going back to your point about the terminal voltage staying really high, there are balancing boards between each cell. And basically all it is a transistor that if a voltage reaches above a certain point, a red LED turns on, and it literally just starts dumping current as heat through the transistor in order to get the voltages all topside balanced. But the rest of the time, there's a green LED telling you everything's fine. So even with those little teeny tiny surface mount LEDs, like literally, I pull mine out and charge it every 6 months because you should, but it always takes like 10 minutes. Like it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also like the Bioenno batteries because they have smaller options. Like sitting here actually right next to me is the little 8 amp hour one that they had sent me that I did my review video on. It's a great size. It's your standard like 9 amp hour AGM battery size. Those are made up of individual, probably like 18650 cells instead of the prismatic foil packs. So they're probably a little bit safer as well. I've never seen one of their 40 amp hour batteries. John, have you?
Yeah, that's what I have in my box is a 40.
Is it prismatic, or is it a big box of little cells? Or do you know?
I haven't seen inside of it. No.
Okay.
I mean, it is equivalent to the same size as a 20 amp hour AGM, not in weight.
No.
But if but it fits inside the box with 6 or 7 inches of spare around each side.
Yeah. Well, cool. Why don't we take a short break, and when we come back, let's deep dive more into your application of a 3D printer in portable operation.
Making your own printed circuit boards can be easier and cheaper than you may think. Eagle PCB tools are used by professional engineers, educators, and hobbyists all over the world. With thousands of component libraries, schematic capture, and board layout tools, Eagle is the best choice for your next project. Check out their board design tutorials on YouTube and free monthly webinars. Download your free copy today at autodesk.com/eagle and start your next design project now.
So, John, one of the other things that has been really interesting is, we did an episode on 3D printing. We had a lot of mixed reactions to that show. Some people were like, this isn't ham radio. Of course, our goal is to expose people to all kinds of tools. And I got into 3D printing, I think it was, it's been over a year now. And started with a small printer to get my feet wet, to become conversational, understand the tools, both for modeling and then slicing and printing. And I, like you, it is kind of becoming an indispensable tool in the house, because if I have a very specific problem I need to solve, I can go fabricate something in a couple of hours that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it either doesn't exist, and that's the beauty, is it might not exist to you, but it's existed to someone else, like, researching in Thingiverse, a bracket for a lampshade holder. No, we don't have to throw that out. I can print one, and if it doesn't exist within a very short matter of time, you can create it quite quickly without too much painful knowledge.
So you mentioned several times in the previous segment that you have printed custom faceplates, you've printed custom brackets, you've printed inserts to keep batteries from moving around, which I find funny because so I built a battery box out of the shallow, big spud case, also with two 20 amp hour AGMs in it. You know what I did to keep them from moving around? I cut
packing tape?
blocks. I cut blocks of styrofoam.
Oh yeah.
Just big chunks of styrofoam and wedged them in there. What's interesting though, and having seen some of your designs on Comms2Go, and it's clear that you've 3D printed these, I'm very curious. Let's start by, what printer or printers do you own? Because you look like you can print some large panels.
So I only have one printer, and I'm still working with the wife on getting authorization for a second printer. So I have the Monoprice Maker Select Plus, which is really I'm going to say the name wrong, and George can correct me on this. Wanhao. It's Wanhao. Wanhao. There you go. You can correct me on that. So it's a knockoff from that. It only has an 8x8 print bed, so I have to get really inventive on what I can do with space, because I don't have that much space to print with. So I will print plates and then print brackets and bind them together. Or, so I do a lot of that. I'll print things separately and then bring them back together with nuts and screws and bolts.
It's panels for boxes, I think, is a great application. Now, what's often difficult is, to your point, affording a printer that has a huge bed. As the bed size area increases, prices tend to ramp up fairly quickly. I still actually have not finished assembling my Ultibots, which has a 12-inch diameter. It's a Delta, so 12-inch diameter build plate capable of like 15 inches in height. But actually, we're joking about me not finishing my battery box. One of the things that actually kind of stopped my momentum on that?
You didn't have your 3D printer yet.
Well, I didn't know 3D printing probably was a thing when I made that video, but
that's true.
There's a company that was called Front Panel Express. You ever heard of them?
I haven't.
So they were an online company. I think they're still around. They actually gave customers for free a custom CAD application. You open up the CAD application and you pick your shape, your materials, whether you want an aluminum, steel, acrylic, resin, like some other stuff. And then you basically draw all the cutouts you want. You include what the corner radiuses are and what tolerances you need. And you submit the design, and in my case, for the Pelican 14, I forget the box. Do you remember 1400, 1450 something box that I used for the battery? It would have been like $50 to get a 1/4 inch thick acrylic plate custom made, and that could have included the engraving of all of the lettering around the units I wanted to mount and everything. But there was a bug in that software for Mac, and at the time I didn't have access to a PC. So that was one thing. The other thing was, when I sat down, I've played with CAD programs before, but I don't have a true mechanical background. And so the concept of radiuses and tolerances was completely foreign to me, and I wasn't able to get those measurements on the Pelican cases or even knew how to talk about them, and so I kind of gave up.
Yeah, there is going to be, when you're printing, there's going to be a lot of misprints and experimenting and not realizing that you had those two devices and you thought they would fit together, but surprise, there's something on the back end of those two devices that doesn't make it compatible, or your box is flexing on you. So there are many iterations that I do to perfect, if I just need a hole for a power meter, I'll print just that little square and fine tune it and tweak it until I get just the right thing before I print the whole plate. Or sometimes if I'm printing the whole plate, I'll only print it at 1 millimeter thick instead of 4. And then that'll give me basically a very thin template that I can start putting stuff in and see if it fits. So yeah, that's what we say. If you send it off to a company, you gotta be exact in your measurements, in your design, because that's an expensive mistake.
Yes, it is. And one of the things that you just referenced is one of the things that I love about 3D printing, especially if you're trying to design something to fit. So at the end of the day, you're going to have in mind a final design. So, in your case, we're talking about a panel that you would prefer to print 4 millimeters thick. But if you are just trying to do a test fit, you can use your 3D printing software and say, only print the first millimeter of this design. You get it out quicker. You don't have to print it as precisely, but it will answer the question, does it fit?
Yes. And I've measured, and I've come to the standard that, because especially those plastic boxes, if there's a downside to those, they flex. And they kind of bow in the center, and so I always give a 1 millimeter tolerance on my panels. And then I also, like I mentioned before, I plastic, or I 3D print the brackets. I used to use the L brackets you'd get at the big box stores, but then that introduced the weakest point in that box was the plate. And the plate, if it got stressed or dropped, it would actually shatter the plate. So I purposely build my brackets that are 3D printed also, that hold the plate to the box. I build those purposely weak and very thin, in their structure. So if there is a hit or a drop, it's going to break a very replaceable bracket versus the, snapping a plate.
Talking about all of this custom fitting in boxes and things, so obviously this isn't necessarily something you can just go online and search for in one of the usual places like Thingiverse or Umagine or any of the other places people can upload, STL files to print. What do you do your design work in?
So I use the free program Tinkercad, and that's a free program. You open it up. It's very simple, but I've yet to find where I need something more complicated. If I need something more complicated, like building the spirals of the painter pole insert, I go to Thingiverse, find someone that has has already built that, and then I drag it into Thingiverse, or I drag it into Tinkercad and repurpose it. Or I put a GoPro mount on my Arrow antenna so I could film the Arrow antenna when I'm doing satellites or something like that. I find there's plenty of people that have made GoPro mounts, and then I can just repurpose that. Or I did with my Arrow antenna, I needed a handle, and I realized, my AR over there has this really nice handle on the Picatinny rail, so I just Googled Picatinny rail, and it came up, and that was a very complicated design, but I just drop it in and adapt it for what you need. So Tinkercad is going to get you where you need to be without having a lot of knowledge and a lot of upstart. And then if you find things more complicated, you usually can, once again, repurpose from Thingiverse.
So you're starting sometimes with other people's designs. And for instance, when you were talking about taking the painter pole to the diamond antenna, obviously you have a cylinder that you have to match the measurements of the antenna. But at the end of the day, it's Acme pipe thread, right? Or not Acme pipe thread. It's it's Acme thread, right?
Yeah. And in designing that yourself is hard, but go into Thingiverse and type in painter pole, and you get 20 different designs you can just take and drop, and then drop your cylinder on top of that or around it. and then you don't have to do any of that heavy lifting.
So when you started designing, Tinkercad is a product that is owned by our show sponsor Autodesk. It is different than most CAD applications because, as I understand it, it runs completely in your web browser, correct?
Yeah, it's in your web browser, and I have over 60 designs now in there, and they haven't come back and asked me for money yet. So I appreciate them doing this. It's very innate. I believe this Tinkercad is meant as a educational tool for STEM programs.
So how would you describe it versus other 3D modeling applications that you may have tried?
It's very user-friendly. Everything is drag and drop, and you're either doing a additive process where you take two pieces and get them exactly how you want, and then you say blend, and it's very much point and click, and there's very, very little technicality to it's drag. I want this long, and I want it this high, and these two pieces I'm going to blend them together, and they become one piece. And so it's an additive process, and then also it's a deductive process. I want a hole in the middle of that now for so if I have an L plate, I'll take two pieces and drag them together to make the L, and then blend them, and then I say, okay, I want a hole for my double pull, double throw switch, or I want a hole for my watt meter. And the fun thing is with this is you can get exact, like the double pull, double throw switches, they have that little notch in them that keeps the plug from spinning in the hole. Well, in this program, you can drop a little tiny piece of plastic in and tell it to blend, and then all of a sudden you print a notch to hold that switch in, or your watt meter, two sides are flat and two sides are round. You can do things to keep your components from sliding around, things you couldn't do with a say drill press and a sheet of metal.
So when I started with this, I don't think I was aware that Tinkercad was a thing. So I started with another Autodesk product called Fusion 360, which my printer came with a very beautiful, like laser etched card advertising. And it was, if you're a maker right now, they'll give you a free license for a year as long as you're using it for non-commercial works. And one of the things that I really like about it is from a design view, I had a lot of industrial arts classes in middle school growing up, and everything was all about isometric views and oblique views and doing three-face relief drawings on, three-dimensional objects. And I like that application because I can start by drawing on a two-dimensional surface. You flip over into 3D, and just like you're talking about, if you want a hole, you draw a circle and then pull it out instead of, raise it up. You can extrude or negatively extrude to create protrusions or holes, basically. Is there any type of like a 2D view that somebody could use in Tinkercad?
I believe there is. You hit a button and it will take you to a 2D view, but I find it's kind of fun to dance around, and I'll change my angle and view, mostly because it's easier to click on items if you can swing around to the other side. And sometimes I'll build things right side up, but because of the way they print and the supports needed, I'll spin the object around upside down before I print. So you can put it into a 2D view, but the system is just so easy just to click and move. In fact, I even used this when I was trying to explain how to track the International Space Station in one of my YouTube videos for the Field podcast. I actually went to this program to demonstrate the rise and the set of a satellite, just because it's so easy to drag and drop items onto the stage and demonstrate things. So yeah, it's so user friendly that I've tried other programs. I actually took a college class in AutoCAD, and for me, it's so fast to get in and out with this program that I'm sure when I get to more complicated designs, I'll want to step up and invest in a higher program. Well,
speaking of which, what is the most complicated thing that you have designed and successfully printed for ham radio?
I would say it's I did a bracket where, like I said, for the Aero antenna, I needed a tube. I needed a square tube for the antenna to fit on. I put a GoPro on the top, a GoPro mount on the top, and then a Picatinny rail on the bottom. And then I didn't want to introduce any type of metal into the antenna because this mount's going to be in the middle. So I printed plastic plugs or bolts to hold it in the center. And then I said, well, what if the antenna needs to go 90-degree turn? So then I replicated it on the other side. And then I thought about it. I said, well, this is kind of fun to hold, but what if I put it on a tripod? So then I went out and couldn't find I have a Bogan photography tripod that comes with a foot. And I couldn't find somebody had done that foot. So then I designed a foot to go on this bracket. So I can either hold it off the Picatinny rail, I can hold it with like a hand grip that would normally go on a rifle. Or I can slide off that Picatinny rail and then slide on this Bogan tripod mount. So it can hold the antenna, say if you're doing a long contact. So that was tricky because I think I had the most iterations and prints to get everything printing just right. And I found with 3D printers, I don't know if mine's just not calibrated exactly, but I will print people's stuff and it's either it doesn't fit right. I think my printing dimensions are a little bit tweaked. So then I have to tweak the design to fit my printer. And I'm sure if I sent that to someone else's printer, it might not print identical.
Okay. So speaking of actually printing, we've talked in the past when we did the 3D printing episode, there's your design software. But once you actually want to get the thing to the printer, the three-dimensional design file has to be what we call sliced into basically it's the same G code that a CNC mill would use to tell the print head how to move at every layer of the design. What do you use for your slicing and printing tools?
So I use the program that came with it, and a local ham of ours, Richard Bateman, that runs the Ham Study. He's in very much a 3D printer also. So I've kind of used him as my mentor on this, and I kept on going back with him problems. And he's like, "Well, what slicer are you using?" And he's like, "If you really want to fix your problems, step up to the Simplify 3D." And so that was a bite. You got to buy the software. But man, my printer, it's like I gave it a new brain. It prints different. It reacts different, and it solves so many problems that I had with the limited free program that came with my printer.
Yeah, oddly enough, not oddly enough, but they're actually they're based out of here in Cincinnati and are only about 2 miles from where I work.
Yeah, they have really, I believe they've nailed it on the head, because it's a simple enough program that you can get up and running with it. But then when you start identifying very unique issues with your printer, they seem to have a function or a mode or a tweak that you can put into your print. And like I said, it's going to be unique for your printer, but you can correct a lot of issues with what they have.
Yeah, and they have a lot of really specialty functionality. Like technically, if you wanted to, you could change the settings of your printer for every layer in a print if you had a reason to. They can do some repair work. It's a powerful application. I also have Simplify 3D. I actually haven't played around with it too much. I've had very good luck with my printer bot with Cura. And if I ever get around to finishing my Ultabot, there is a custom version of... it might be Kiss Slicer, I can't remember, but the guy who's like the godfather of my printer had worked with one of the other slicer manufacturers to do a lot of custom work for that printer. And the cool thing is, there's a lot of slicers out there that are free, and chances are one of them will work good for you. And another thing that's really nice, for instance, Simplify 3D for the Ultabot's D300, there isn't a profile for it because it's not a hugely well-known printer. But the Monoprice Maker Select that you've talked about, that is a very well adopted, very well understood, very well known printer. It's, as you mentioned, it is basically a rebadged Wanhao duplicator. So there are 1,000,001 mods out there. Plus, at this point, that printer's been out so long, people have figured out how to tune it perfectly. And there's a lot of good documentation out there for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of support. And I found that going to Google to find answers, everything came back to, well, just do this and Simplify 3D. And I'm like, okay, so I got to get the program first before I can solve the problem.
So, on that note, have you done any upgrades to your printer?
I have. I've replaced the hot end, and I've put in a new circular fan, a 360 fan. I've replaced the metal plate underneath the bed. I've replaced that, and then I've printed some little accessories that will clip on each. They could hold the scraper or hold the cable, the filament coming off the roll. I actually had to reprint the roll holder because, ironically enough, the holder that comes with it from Monoprice doesn't hold the Monoprice filament. The diameter of the hole is wrong. So it's too thin. It's not thick enough. So I found a hack on Thingiverse to do that. But then I started using Foxprint, which is a much, much cheaper filament. I don't think it has the luster when you print that you get from the higher end filaments. But that Foxprint uses, once again, a very small diameter hole. And so I had to, like I said, things are up when your 3D printer's printing a new 3D printer. That's when you start getting worried.
Well, I mean, that's, we joke about that, but as I mentioned earlier this year, back in March, I went to the RepRap Festival, and that's the entire point of the RepRap movement, is to make printers that can replicate themselves. Fortunately, we haven't given them very intelligent brains yet, so we're not at Terminator class yet.
Yes, yes.
But, to that point on my printer bot, there's a little 3D printed bracket that holds the bed leveling sensor, which is basically an inductive sensor that, as the print head approaches the bed before a print starts, it signals it to let it know what is the offset between the orifice of the nozzle and the print bed, so it can, level an uneven print bed out in software. And that broke on me. And I actually had to duct tape the bed leveling sensor back to it so I could print a replacement part for my printer, which, I mean, it's cool you can do that.
Yeah, it is. And bed leveling has been my nemesis. That's why I think the next one I want something that's auto bed leveling, because I can get my bed tuned after several hours of painstaking getting it done. And then it'll stay good for weeks and weeks and weeks. In fact, I got the new metal support for under the bed, and I held on to it for over a month because I thought, I don't want to touch this. It's printing just right. Everything is just right. And then I had the head come down and crash on the bed one time, and it threw everything out of whack. And so that's when I replaced it. But then I was back to, it's an evening project to get that bed back to where you want it to print.
Yeah, it's like tuning a piano.
Yes, and I'm not that good at tuning pianos.
As it turns out, most people aren't. That's why it's very expensive. So you talked about this Fox filament. So are most of your designs, do you print in PLA, ABS, or some exotic?
I do everything PLA. I have one roll of ABS, and I've never really been successful with ABS. I did get a roll of PETG, because I needed the high temperature, because I was building the fan. It was a 360 circular fan that went around the nozzle. And they said, don't do this in PLA, you'll melt it. So I've done one roll of PETG, but mostly everything I do is PLA. The one thing I did successfully print with ABS was I got a sloper antenna, a sloper dipole, so it's a single-sided dipole that comes off the tower, and it has the 4080 on top, and then it has a 30 meter underneath. Well, it only came with 4 spacers, and so the spacers, the two antennas were touching each other. So I 3D printed about 10 spacers and attached them to them, and I did that in ABS just because I knew it was going to be out in the sun, and I was just worried about degradation on the tower.
Yeah, because actually that's a good point, because PLA, even left in a hot car on a sunny day, can melt on you.
Yeah, and that's what I figure when I do these boxes. I'm like, if it's going to get hot enough to melt PLA, then you got other stuff in there that is a little more valuable that you probably don't want to be getting that hot.
Yes. Well, that's cool. So another thing that's often an option with 3D printers, when you print, do you have it tethered to your machine via USB? Are you putting it on an SD card?
So I did the SD card because I don't trust my computer to stay up long enough to go through a print. So I did the card transfer where you would move it back and forth, and that got old really fast. And then the other issue I had was I had no way of monitoring it. I would set up webcams and stuff like that to monitor it until Richard told me about Octoprint, which is a Raspberry Pi server that will run your 3D printer, and you can have remote control of it. You can load files, so it comes over as a web server to your computer. So now I just launched this Octoprint on my main printer, upload the file. I can warm up the bed. I can move things. I can tweak. It has a built-in webcam. It has a time-lapse recorder. And then the other problem it solved was when I had just a regular stock webcam, and then I went to my daughter's dance competition. I happened to log into it, and it was a big, huge glob moving around the bed. I was printing a glob. It had broke free.
I'm guessing not intentionally.
Not intentionally. It was a very big mess sliding around. And so I had to call my neighbor and say, hey, run into my house and turn off my 3D printer before it starts burning things up. So this Octoprint is great because not only can you view it, but you can, as long as you've made the port forwarding to get outside of your home firewall, I can be on my phone, either upstairs or I can be at work, and I can be monitoring my prints. And if I get a print fail, I can hit stop and I can tell it to stop. Or if the print is done, then I can text my wife, and she's a pro at this. She goes in and clears off the bed and resurfaces it, and then texts me back and say, okay, it's ready. And then from work, I can start a new print and start over that way. So Octoprint is and it was very easy. They give you the file. You pretty much flash it onto a Raspberry Pi. You don't even need to go through you get started with the basic, actually, no, it was an image. And then I just did the apt-get and, to do updates. But everything came pre-configured in an image. So it's been a great tool.
Well, that's cool. It's, for the ham who may not yet be convinced about this technology, what would you say about 3D printing? Like what is your, obviously you're bought in, you found a lot of applications for it, but what would you say to the naysayers?
I would say get on Tinkercad. Well, first of all, find the thing that you're trying to solve, and get on Tinkercad, lay out some type of design, and then find some maker space around you. Or, there's 3D printing stores now that will print your item for you. In fact, when you are on Thingiverse, I think you can select, and there's actually, I could sign up for this as a possible vendor. Somebody could send me a file locally and I could print it for them and then charge them whatever the fee is. So I would say, 3D printing is a dark art, and there's a lot of magic to it. I think it's not 100% accessory plug and play thing.
Yeah, it's not a toaster.
No, it's not a toaster. It's not going to, but like a toaster, it will still give you uneven results. It'll work one time and then another time it won't, and you don't know why. So I say just find something, find a solution, and send it to someone local. Don't invest in the machine, and get it printed back and look at it and say, wow, that solved my need. I don't have any more needs, or, what's next? What can I do? Like my father has a sun oven, and he uses that to, while we're camping, just to, warm, cook brownies or cook cinnamon rolls. And of course we had to have that at the solar eclipse because we were doing everything sun. And that company has come up with this little tiny clip that goes on there that has a little pinhole basically, and it tells you when you're aligned with the sun. And I looked at that and thought, well, why don't I just make that for my Biono Power panels or my Go Zero panels? And so within minutes, I had this little tiny design that I can clip on the solar panel, and the sun comes through a hole and lines up to another dent of a hole. And it tells me, are my panels, perfectly aligned? So there's a lot of things you can do in ham radio that you can find solutions for. I was kind of going through the list of things I've done. Even with the solar eclipse, I 3D printed a bracket to put the solar filter over my lens and back over again. The battery brackets, this, let's see what else we have here. Spacer blocks. If I just need some, like you said, you did a styrofoam block, I was able to, print down to millimeter accuracy, a block for something. Or those MFJ analyzers that have the power switch that always seem to get bumped on and kill your battery. I don't know if you have one of those or not.
I'm familiar with the problem.
Yeah. So I just 3D printed a little bracket that sits around that, and So now when it's in the bag, it does the power button doesn't get bumped. You have to put your finger in there and push down on it. So there's a lot of things you can do to find things or radio heads like ICOM will commonly, I think, don't they charge if you want the base bracket?
Yeah, they do now at least.
Accessory.
Yeah, that's the deluxe edition of the radio. Yeah,
so I had a customer that had that, and I printed a base, printed to another one so it tilts and does everything that that bracket does. I just printed my own, and it was after design and everything, it's pennies compared to having to buy whatever the manufacturer's doing.
Yep, just a little bit of elbow grease. And what's cool is you're learning a new skill also. And once you have it, like after you get through the joy of burning through your first roll of filament as a new printer owner, having downloaded a bunch of tchotchkes from Thingiverse, the first time that you actually put together I have a problem, maybe somebody has solved it, and you go search the web, find out that, oh no, this doesn't exist, and then sit down and design the thing, like a part to a vacuum, like a clip to a vacuum or something. It really, really drives home how powerful and amazing a technology it is, and it's only going to continue to get better. Now, to that point, when you are inquiring to your wife about printer number 2, what are you considering?
So there is and you're going to know the name right off the bat because it's so far in the future. I think I've forgotten the name, but it's actually one that has an add-on kit that you can put 4 filaments.
Yeah, that's the Prusa i3 Mark II.
Oh, there we go. That's Christmas right there.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I want that because I do multiple filaments now. I figured out a way to do it in Simply 3D, pause the print at 4mm, change the color. So now when I print my plates, I can print lettering in different colors on top of it. But I thought, man, having 4 colors, and that has an auto level bed too. So I think that might be Father's Day, my birthday, and a couple Christmases combined.
Yeah, that's it's a good machine. And I'll be honest with you. I obviously you're well a tinkerer, but save the extra pennies, order it assembled. If you've ever spent time looking at the assembly manual, it's pretty involved. It's doable. But as somebody who bought a printer kit because it's not available assembled, and am still dealing with the frustration of having this kit halfway through the steps, and I've had it for months, and of course never printed with it. I wish I could have paid somebody to assemble it for me because I just don't have the time.
Yeah, that kit looks. I mean, and it's not like I need the extra bed space because I've been able to pretty much figure out how to use an 8x8. I'm glad I got the larger one. There is a smaller one from Monoprice that a lot of people say that's a good entry one, but it's got a little bit smaller bed. So what I did is when I got that, I measured the boxes that I typically build. And I said, okay, how wide is that? And they were, and so I knew kind of the bed size, but I can get away with a smaller bed, but I don't think I can get away without, having self-leveling and multiple color filaments and kind of some things that come along. So it might not be my second printer. It might be this printer gets sold and it becomes my primary printer, kind of like the secondary HT upgrade.
All right. Well, outstanding. Well, why don't we take another break and then we'll get back and say our goodbyes.
Elecraft is a premier provider of high-performance transceivers, pan adapters, power amplifiers, antenna tuners, and many great station accessories. Elecraft products are great for DXers, contesters, portable operators, and anyone who wants innovative features and great performance. If you want to operate portable, check out the amazing KX2. It's my top pick for soda adventures. I've been a customer from the beginning, starting with my K2 transceiver that I built almost 20 years ago. Since then, I've owned just about every Elecraft transceiver they've made, and I've been a very happy customer. You'll really enjoy their products. Check them out at elecraft.com.
So, George, it's another strong case for owning a 3D printer. Are you convinced yet?
You know what's actually pushing me towards the edge is building this KX3 Go box. I wound up building it out of wood, and so I'm constantly cutting little pieces of wood and screwing pieces of wood together to fashion some kind of little bracket. And so listening to John talk about some of the things he's made, you're sort of motivating me to want to get one just because I want to be able to make these brackets and spacers and things you're talking about.
Yeah, the sliding bracket, I'm really happy with that, where I've been able to manufacture something that goes into the existing holes on the radio and then build a receiver for that. And so you can slide your radio in and out on this. It's like a sliding rail for radios. And I haven't seen anybody do that before, but it makes a whole lot of sense in when you're putting stuff in boxes and racks to slide the radio out, work on the cables, and slide it in. So you're not trying to, put that L bracket in without, deconstructing the whole box.
I'd love to see a picture of that. And it's pretty rigid the way you designed it. because I use the L brackets like you did. I use the, from Home Depot or Lowe's, I use the L bracket as the tie piece between the box and my receiver. Mm-hmm. And that gives it nice and rigid. And then it's just a 3D printed part that really just needs to, it has one on each side, and they're kind of slotted. So the radio will slide in, and then you can lock it in. Nice. And that works out really well. Especially I had an audio problem, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I was able to just grab the radio and pull on it, and the whole radio just came right out of the box. I figure out if it's an audio or a cable issue, and then I just slide it back in. If I had even thumb screws, I would probably break a few fingers trying to get my fingers in there to get those thumb screws out, and then I'll never be able to line it. So I'll send you. We'll include a picture of that. But that'd be good to put in the notes. Those are some fun things.
Well, awesome. John, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your evening and from your family to spend with us here. We're very excited about what you guys are doing, what you are doing on the Field Radio podcast. I've enjoyed getting to hear you, quote unquote, on the air, and also have enjoyed getting to get to know your dad a little bit on the air, both through 360 and Field Radio. If you would, tell our listeners more where they can find you online.
So we are on the Ham Radio 360 website. You just click on the Field Radio tab, or we are fieldradiopodcast.org, and that just basically takes you to that same spot. We are on our own feed, so we're not on the Ham Radio 360 feed. We're on a Field Radio podcast feed. So if you listen to our show, if you like it, then you'll need to subscribe to that feed.
And of course, you can search in your favorite podcasting app by looking for Field Radio Podcast. So again, thank you so much. And before we go, I want to just take a minute, and for any of our listeners who are in Houston, around Houston, or have family in Houston, our thoughts are with you as the hurricane is heading that way. Hopefully everybody will be safe and, make it through it. And I'm sure, actually, we've already heard hams on the hurricane net. George, I think you mentioned earlier that Mike was actually in net control earlier.
That's right. Mike, VA3MW, who was on our show last time talking about remote station operation. And it was kind of a funny thing. I was curious if there was any traffic on HF this afternoon. And so I dialed into a web SDR receiver and listened on 7268, which is a common hurricane net frequency on 40 meters. And who's running net control for the hurricane net but Mike? So it was great to hear him on there. He's booming in. So yeah, it was very active net, and he was on for about an hour and then passed it off to another station to run net controls. So very active in HF, and Mike was doing a wonderful job helping everybody out.
All right, so we hope everybody makes it through safely. In the meantime, if you are interested in sending us feedback, if you have show ideas, if you are working on a project that you want to come on and share with our listeners, or just want to be interviewed about a topic in general, please feel free to reach out to us by emailing at workbench@hamradio360.com. Visit us online for all of our show notes for the Workbench, for Ham Radio 360, and for the Field Radio podcast at www.hamradio360.com. There's also links to all of our friends online, as well as other content that gets produced that are interest to our listeners. If you want to interact with us directly, you can find me on Twitter at KF7IJZ.
And I'm at KJ6VU.
John, where are you on Twitter?
I am at John W. Jacobs, but I'm also at Field Radio Pod.
Okay, I'm going to have to find you. I didn't know that. I'm going to have to find the other one.
My John W. Jacobs is usually my corporate rant account.
That's your proactive customer service request?
Yes, it actually worked at Cabela's once. I tweeted that the Cabela's line was so long and actually got a tweet back, and then the manager came out and apologized. They just heard from corporate that the lines are long and they're bringing up other people to help check out. So it does work. Yeah. So that's my rant line, but Field Radio Pod is where I keep all the ham radio stuff.
All right. Well, remember, folks, Ham Radio 360 will be back next week on Tuesday with another episode of Ham Radio 360, followed on Thursday by another episode of Field Radio Podcast. Until next time, 73.
73s.
Hey, thanks for sticking around at the end of the show here. We have a small mini feature we want to share with you. Back in episode number 28, we interviewed Brian, W6BY, and Brian talked about microwave ham radio operating. Well, every year, in August and September, the ARRL 10 gigahertz and up contests brings out operators from all over the country to operate on the microwave bands. Here on the West Coast, a linked repeater network called the Cactus Intertie is used for the intercom in order to let operators communicate with each other and coordinate their very long microwave radio shots. So as a special treat, we're going to play a few minutes of audio from the network so you can hear what the stations sound like when they're organizing and coordinating their microwave shots. This audio is pretty noisy because it was recorded with a handheld microphone in a speaker. I'm sure you'll enjoy this special treat. Thanks for listening.
Figure grid again. Yeah, we're still finishing up here. One of the operators is still finishing, and then I will put a carrier up your direction on 025. W3RWN, W6QIW. W3RWN, W6QIW, I have a carrier you're on your bearing. 025.
Who has the carrier on 025? Who has the carrier on 025, please?
Fraser has a carrier towards you on 025, W6QIW.
Okay. Not very loud for Fraser, that's why I was asking.
Well, peek it and we'll reverse.
Fraser, QIW, we have your carrier. Reverse, we'll send to you, over.
W3RWN, W6QIW, drop carrier, go to sideband, call us.
You're currently running with at this moment?
At W3RWN, W6QIW, we are not hearing any transmissions from you, over. Except your carriers, and they were loud. Maybe that Denny's did have a liquor license.
No kidding. W3RWN, we have carrier backup at Fraser on 025.
Okay.
Your carrier
Drop carrier and go to sideband. And we will call you. Baca, I have carrier. I'm Baca, I have carrier.
RWN, carrier is dropped. We're listening for Fraser.
86FP, WA6QDP, Matt Diablo.
WA6QDP, 86FP. How you doing, Brian?
Oh, pretty good. Are you at a fixed location there or in motion?
I'm in motion at the moment. I've been roving all afternoon.
Okay, put me in the queue when you get your next stop.
Okay, will do. Should be about 10 minutes.
This is KI6CLA. I hear Gary. He'll be ready in 10 minutes. Anyone north of Diablo? KI6CLA. I have a negative on operators north of Diablo. We'll reposition in 10 minutes to the south. E6CCC, mobile leaving Santiago, or Johnstone. I don't know if they're listening or not. Or W3RWN, are you hearing W6DL?
Yeah, stand by. We're just sorting things out here. So we will go and put our radios on 150, and we will look for DL.
Roger. I'm sending to you right now on 150. It's the path that I heard you on. It's not necessarily the direct path.
DL, this is RWN. We're ready to have you send to us, over.
I'm sending for the last 10 minutes on 150 on the last heading that I heard your signal on.
Sorry, I misspoke. We're ready to send to you. We're ready to send to you. You're very weak here. You drop carrier and we'll reverse, over.
Roger, Roger. You can go to sideband. W6DL.
This is KI6CLA. Any Central Valley rovers available? Probably Los Banos area north.
RWN, W6DL. Okay, I picked up on you guys. It's not a whole lot better. See what you can do with it now.
WA6QDP, AD6FP.
AD6FP, WA6QDP.
Ready to run if you want to give it a try.
Okay, I heard you up the back, so let's go up to 35 and I'll send a carrier to you.
Okay, going up to 35.
DL, says RWN. We're listening for you, over.
Roger, Roger. There's two distinct signals, and there's two different headings. They're about 3 degrees apart, so I peeked up on the second one.
Okay. All right. So we're recording. John, I'd like to take a moment and thank you very much for sharing your time with us this evening. And I would like to welcome you to your lesson in how to take an hour-long podcast, turn it into a 2-hour-long recording, and it actually take about 4 hours to record.
Well, that's not too bad.
We've refined this to a science. You should have seen it before we got more efficient. It was really a nightmare. What is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So here's where we're going to go. Beep.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. This is ridiculous. John, do you prepare for your shows? What's that like?
I asked Cal, I'm like, what, how do you do your notes? And he goes, I just talk.
So are we still recording this stupid thing?
Okay. Thanks, dude. 3.
Am I throwing you off your game?
Yeah. 3, 2. So, it's kind of the last thing. No, that's not where I was. Hold on. Yeah. Technical difficulties. All right. So for real this time.